You have the right to talk. Let them talk.
Make up whatever you want. I'm a big believer. I'm a big believer, as Patrick used to say. Everybody's entitled to their own opinion. Everybody's not entitled to their own facts.
You take your own advice, Dennis.
Get your hands off me right now.
Come on. Sit down. Hey, he has the right to talk. Without being.
No, he had a right to ask the question.
They don't have to be putting their hands on my
I will leave you back. Get your hands off me.
Take your own advice.
Get your hands off me. I will ask you.
It was mostly confusion. There was no real anger on my part at that time. I was confused about what was happening, why it was happening, and just trying to figure out what was going on. Months later, yeah, a little bit angry. You know, I don't think, not terribly so. I'm not an overly emotional guy in general, but a little bothered by the fact that the knowledge that the police can come into my workplace, any workplace, and place somebody under arrest for doing their job, but in of all places, a public library, it just seems even more horrible.
There's a moment at which we think this is just all a big mistake, and we'll, even though we're upset about what happened, it's a violation of the First Amendment and a violation of our normal procedures, that we'll explain this, and the charges will be dropped. And so we've kind of been waiting for that since May, explaining to everybody we can explain it to, Steve's lawyers, Jeremy's lawyer, etc., and me, calling the chief, etc. And they've kind of doubled down on this, and they're moving ahead with the prosecution. And so at this stage, I'm actually outraged. This is a big violation of the very First Amendment to the Constitution of the United States. And we would expect our police department, which we've worked with very closely over the years, to want to talk to us about this and deal with this in a community way. And instead, they've chosen to defend the indefensible conduct of their off-duty police officer.
Kansas City, Kansas. Since 9/11, the American police state has been constantly trying to outdo itself in the oppression of civil rights. From the Patriot Act to national security letters to warrantless wiretapping to militarized protest crackdowns, the state has been unable to hide its authoritarian desires. The oppression of rights and free speech was put on full display recently at the Kansas City Public Library, where a senior library staff member was brutally taken down and arrested by police and private security officers for peacefully intervening in the harassment of a library patron. The armed guards were present as security detail for Dennis Ross, champion of the Israeli lobby and former Bush official who pushed for the Iraq invasion. Ross was giving a talk called Truman and Israel. Steve Woolfolk, director of public relations at the library, became the victim of abuse when he tried to remind the security detail of library policy after an audience member was forcibly removed from the microphone during the Q&A session. The library hosts several speaking events every month, and Woolfolk knew this would be one of the more controversial events, where the library makes a rare exception allowing armed security guards. The library has conditions when security details are brought in for speakers. According to the Bill of Rights Defense Committee (BRDC), first, nobody could be forcibly removed for asking an unpopular question. Second, nobody could be removed at all without consulting with the library staff, who would only allow an individual to be removed if staff concluded they were an imminent threat. Woolfolk had positioned himself near the stage where people ask questions, prepared to ask those who went on too long to give up the microphone for the next person. Jeremy Roth-Kuschel was first up. According to an official statement from the Kansas City Public Library issued on September 30th, the activist, Jeremy Roth-Kuschel, was first to the microphone when Ross' presentation turned to Q&A, and his question inferred that the U.S. and Israel have engaged in state-sponsored terrorism. Ross responded and, when Roth-Kuschel attempted to follow up, he was grabbed by one of the private security guards and then by others in the private security detail. Stephen Woolfolk, the library's director of programming and marketing, attempted to intervene, noting that public discourse is accepted and encouraged at a public event held in a public library. Woolfolk thought he had successfully diffused the situation, noting that Roth Kuschel said he would leave voluntarily, which he attempted to do. But these off-duty police officers, along with private security guards from the Jewish Community Foundation (JCF), couldn't stop themselves from initiating violence once they had caught the scent. The BRDC describes how Woolfolk, seeking to keep the peace and the commitment to free and lively discourse, became the victim of brutality by agents of the state and the Israeli lobby. Woolfolk wanted to make clear that this was a public event at a public library and thus Roth Kuschel was not trespassing. He went to find his supervisor, but before he could do so, Woolfolk says an off-duty and out-of-uniform police officer grabbed him from behind and threw him against a pillar. Per Woolfolk, the officer never announced who he was or told Woolfolk he was under arrest, but just kept telling him to stop resisting. As Woolfolk told the Dissent Newswire, he informed the officer, "I'd be happy to do whatever he wanted, and that all I was resisting was the urge to fall face first onto the floor." According to Woolfolk, a second police officer, this one in uniform, delivered several blows to Woolfolk's knee, causing him to be diagnosed with grade 1 torn MCL. Eventually he was thrown over a chair and handcuffed. When he asked what he was being arrested for, the officer told him he didn't know. One can only imagine how other members of the audience felt as they watched this shameless assault by armed security on a library worker who did nothing more than peaceably calm down a volatile situation. Woolfolk was charged with interfering with the arrest of Roth Kuschel, who was himself charged with trespassing and resisting arrest. Library Director Crosby Kemper says the arrests were unwarranted and an egregious violation of First Amendment rights. The First Amendment's protection of the rights of free speech and assembly is cherished by all Americans, but particularly by libraries and their patrons, he says. An overzealous off-duty police officer violated the rights of one of our patrons at Ambassador Rostock in the library and doubled down by arresting Steve Woolfolk, who was trying to explain the library's rules to the officer. In defense of the freedom of speech, the library stands fully in support of Steve. For someone to be assaulted and then arrested for asking a question, in a public library of all places, is abhorrent. The library should be a place where people of all points of view can feel safe and welcome, said Woolfolk. Nobody, be it an individual or an agent of the state, should be able to take it upon themselves to silence a point of view simply because they disagree. The security detail for Dennis Ross, who held important diplomatic positions in the Clinton, Bush and Obama administrations, was certainly tapped into the surveillance state and most likely knew about the activism of Roth Kuschel. He and an associate were the only ones searched before being allowed to enter, according to Roth Kuschel. Ross has a notorious history in pushing the statecraft behind America's military hegemony focused on the Middle East. He worked under neocon warmonger Paul Wolfowitz early in his career, and signed 2 letters in March 2003 by the Project for a New American Century supporting an invasion of Iraq. Ross served in various special roles involving the Middle East and Southwest Asia under 3 presidents and is a distinguished fellow at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy, which is funded by the American Israel Public Affairs Committee. Considering this background, it's no wonder Ross didn't stop his jackboots from pouncing on a peace activist challenging the narrative, or assaulting a member of the library's staff who dared defend free speech. Stifling dissent is crucial to the message that invading countries and drone bombing women and children is necessary to secure the peace. Read more at http://thefreethought project.com/library-worker-beaten-arrested-defending-free-speech/#Bob03BJLOQMFR2BU.99